Okay, this is another big one, folks. In this chapter, we're going to find that we're going to talk about a lot of hotspots around the world today. Areas that are experiencing violence, and we're going to kind of try and trace back to this period, the Cold War period, and maybe we'll find that some of the roots of these modern hotspots can be traced back to this period or even before. And this first section we're going to do is about Israel, Palestine. So we know, and I'm not going to go all the way back. I did a deep dive history. If you want to check it out, go ahead and check out my old lecture. That European Jews have been moving to the Middle East, and especially to the area known as Palestine, for decades before World War I. This was called the Zionist movement. After World War I, when Britain took over this area, they had a document called the Balfour Declaration, in which they really kind of invited many European Jews to move to this area. In 1936, many Arabs in Palestine started getting upset because of the huge number of European Jews moving into this area. The Balfour Declaration very clearly said that the Jewish people moving in should not disrupt the lives of the people who lived here. So now we're going to talk about, so 1937, the British try and limit the amount of Jewish people moving in to this area. And look, a lot of the Jewish people moving into this area they had seen the writing on the walls, right? They had seen what Hitler was doing, and they said, we got to get out of here. Understandably so. Let's go to our historic homeland. So now World War II happens, and the Holocaust happens, and after witnessing the horrors of the Holocaust, the UN, the newly established UN, in one of its very first acts, says we should give some of this land to European Jews so they can have their own homeland, because what happened to Jewish people in Europe during the Holocaust by Hitler was horrendous. The people who lived here, though, and let's just take a quick look before I get into that. Here is a chart of Jewish immigration to Palestine. 1919 is World War I, and you can see that really when Hitler takes over here in 1933 in Germany, these numbers spike dramatically. They try to cut back around 1937, and when the war hits, well, there's very little movement of people during the war, especially when the war heats up. So the Arab people, so this is a map that the UN drew. They said, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll take this land right here. That's called Palestine. And we're going to give these orange areas to Jewish people. And we'll give these yellow areas to the Arab people who live there and have been living there for 1,000 years. And this little area, and it's interesting, is the city of Jerusalem. City of Jerusalem, of course, is the holy land for three major religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And if you notice, it's white because he said this will be a UN administered area. We'll run Jerusalem. Okay, that was the original plan. So the Arabs, though, who lived in this yellow area, they were not happy about this. They said, "Why are you giving up our land like that? Like, it was bad enough when all these Europeans are moving into our land, but now you're just going to straight out chop our land in half and give half to European Jews. That's not right." And immediately after this declaration was established, the Arabs attack the European Jews, and they start a war. This is the ArabIsraeli War of 1948. And this is going to turn out to be the hardest of the four wars that are fought in this area for the European Jews. It's incredibly hard fought. The European Jews were not prepared for this war, and it was very, very close. But Israel wins this war, and as a result, they redraw the borders. Okay, so here is the original idea from the UN, and after the war, which the Jews won, the Jews now are going to rename this area here Israel. Yeah, Israel is still a country. And Israel takes this area up here from the Muslim Palestinians. They creep down in here and they take some of this area just north of the Gaza Strip, this area along the Egyptian border, and a bunch of this area around this biggest chunk of Palestinian land called the West Bank. And of course, we know that Jerusalem, the holy city, is in the middle of the West Bank. So war happens, and because of this war, Arabs lose even more land. And Jerusalem is largely taken from the Arabs. You notice there's no more UN mandate. This is now Israel. Israel took a bunch of land after this war. Because of that, Jordan, who, by the way, let's pull it up on this map. You can see it better. Jordan is here. Okay, it's a big country. It extends all the way over to this area, even larger. Jordan says, we'll take the West Bank to protect, in part to protect the Palestinians who lived in that area. They're Arabs, they're Muslims. Jordanians are Arabs, they're Muslims. And they say, look, we're going to try and help out these people right here. So if you look, you're going to notice that this area is now called Jordan. And the people of the West Bank agree to live under Jordanian rule. They're kind of happy. They got a strong neighbor now who's going to help protect them, I guess. And now this is one of the major sticking points, and I want you to remember this for a modern world. 15% of the Arabs in this land chose to stay. 85% of the Arabs who lived in this land, the West Bank, chose to migrate into Jordan. These people, descendants of these people, believe they should be allowed to come back. One of the sticking points in negotiations between Israel and the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, is the return rights to these 85% of the Palestinian Arabs who chose to leave after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, after Jordan had taken over this land with the agreement of the Palestinians. Palestinians agreed to allow the Jordanians to come in and take this land. Okay. 8 years later, the Egyptians, who, oh, by the way, just to kind of set the scene, I think I'll do this map. The Egyptians, now this map's not good enough. Egypt is right next to this area, right? Here's your Jordan, here's your Israel, your West Bank, which has been annexed by Jordan, the Gaza Strip. This was Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula. And this still is Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula. And this is this is Egypt, and Egypt is huge, right? It's massive country over here, way bigger than all these small little countries there. So Egypt now, who are very powerful, decides that they are going to block the Suez Canal because they're mad. First off, they didn't want Israel to be given half of this land. They felt like their people were having land taken from them. Maybe their cousins, I don't know the right phrase. And they decided we're going to cut off the Suez Canal. Now, we remember that the Suez Canal is right here, okay? And it connects the big Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea, which then drops down into the Persian Gulf. And you can actually, from down here, you can go and go to India. You're in the Indian Ocean at that point. And the Arabs said, hey, or the Egyptians said, look, I know that England and France built this for us 100 years ago. But we're kind of mad with them right now because England and France were big decision makers in the creation of Israel. And they said, we're going to block it. Actually, no, we're going to take it back. Our land, always been, this is Egypt, folks, okay? Egypt is his historic land. And he said, we're going to take back the Suez Canal. And, well, Israel used to use the Suez Canal. And we can look at it from this angle. Here's your Israel. They used to use the Suez Canal. Their ships would go and come down the Suez Canal and would drop into the Indian Ocean. Right, here's your Red Sea. This is the Gulf of Suez, actually. And there's the Red Sea. And they would drop down into the Indian Ocean and they would use it to trade with India and China, Australia, Southeast Asia, that whole area. And so Israel's mad that they're doing this. England and France are mad because they used to control the Suez Canal. They say, wait a minute, we built that thing. That cost a lot of money. No. And Britain and France and Israel decide that they're going to attack Egypt. They start attacking Egypt. And at this point, something really strange happens. The US and the USSR get together and they say no. So you can't attack Israel or you can't attack Egypt because they want their land back. Actually, you know what? You guys had the land for 200 years. You had the Suez Canal for 100 years. You had the Suez Canal for 100 years. It's time to give it back. Britain, France, stop. This is now the two big boys on the block, right? So, I mean, America's the biggest. Imagine now you have, the two biggest kids on the block, and those are the small little kids. And they're fighting, and the two big kids walk up and they say, you guys better stop beating up on this kid here. And actually, you have to give him back his land. And Britain and France are like, hey, America, aren't you our friend? And America goes, you're in the wrong. We do what's right. We don't just try and do what's right for our friends. And one thing to keep in mind, and this is an interesting fact as well, is that in 1947, when Israel was created, America was one of the only countries who said no. They said, you shouldn't do that. You can't just take land from people like that. I wonder what the Native Americans thought about that, huh? But I digress. So anyways, so Britain and France and Israel pull out of the war. But Israel takes a bunch of land. Okay, Israel says, okay, we'll stop fighting you, but guess what? We're taking the Sinai Peninsula. We're taking the Gaza Strip. We're taking the West Bank. And we're taking the Golan. No, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's not after the Suez War. This was after this Suez War, America and the USSR force Britain and France and Israel to stop. War's over, but not in the eyes of Israel. Not in the eyes of Egypt. And Egypt's going to go, and 11 years later, they talk to Jordan and they talk to Syria. Here's Jordan and here's Syria on our map. Okay, and they send secret telegrams. We should attack Israel. Let's get rid of these people. By this point, the U.S. has become closer to Israel. Britain and France have kind of pulled back in their connections there. And Israel finds out about it. They had spies or whatever. I don't know. But they found out about it. So Israel launches a surprise attack against Egypt, who, oh, by the way, Egypt is the most powerful country of all the Arab countries, the Muslim Arab countries. Israel launches a surprise attack of all Egypt's Air Force, and they destroy all of their planes Israel has planes too. At this point, Israel's buying weapons from the U.S. Air Force while it's on the ground. Okay, they wipe it all out. Egypt has no more planes. There will not be another Arab country with an Air Force after this. Okay. Not like that, at least. You have helicopters, whatever. And then they send in the troops, the Israelis do, and they take the Suez Canal, they take the West Bank, they take the Gaza Strip, and they take the Golan Heights. And they say, bam, we're taking all this. You guys shouldn't have been planning to attack us. And America at this point, like I said, is more buddied up with Israel. So America just kind of says, not our business. And now we have this expanded Israel, okay? This Sinai Peninsula is almost as big as all of Israel. They just took all of the West Bank, including, of course, Jerusalem, which they already had, but there are a lot of historic cities around Jerusalem, like Bethlehem, okay? That's like, isn't that the city where the Bible says that Jesus came from? I don't know, Nazareth? These areas, okay, East Jerusalem it's called. The Gaza Strip, great land. On the coastal land is always great land, right? In the Golan Heights from Syria. And the U.S. just kind of says, okay, well, still more fighting. This makes the Palestinians furious who live in the West Bank, who live in the Gaza Strip. And in the 1972 Olympics, there's a movie out about this called Munich. If you're interested, check it out. The Palestinian terrorists, and we're starting to see that word terrorists, aren't we? Take 11 Israeli athletes in the Munich Olympics of 1972. They capture them and they kill them. But before they kill them, they like hold them hostage. And I think get into these stories that I've heard that like they requested an airplane and we're going to get out of here and we're going to take the hostages, but then that didn't work out, so they kill all the hostages. Maybe there was a rescue attempt. This is a monument to these athletes. These athletes had nothing to do with war, with taking land. These were Olympic athletes. This is a tragedy, horrible tragedy. That happened to the Israelis. Now, there's stories that the Germans, should have been stronger protecting the Israelis, but didn't because there was still like a hinge of anti-Semitism there. Don't forget, Hitler was in control there less than 30 years before this. The Germans had the Olympics when Hitler was in control. And that was when American Jesse Owens went over there and just demolished all the German athletes. I hear that Hitler was furious on the drive home that day. Sorry, but I digress. And now let's take a look here. So wait, we're going to keep going. The next year, Egypt and Syria, who are still mad, they attack Israel. And they want to take back the land that they lost in 1967 in the Six-Day War that Israel easily beat them, took their Air Force, and all that. And at this point, Egypt had made a strategic move and decided to buddy up with the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union says, you know what, it's only fair because America was buddying up closer with Israel. And the Soviet Union in Cold War fashion says, it's only fair that Israel get back that land. That was wrong. They shouldn't have taken that land from Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. And the U.S. says, I think you're right. Now, was the U.S. trying to avoid confrontation, a Cold War confrontation with the Soviet Union? The U.S. and the Soviet Union in the 70s were trying to detente. They were trying to not be so against each other all the time. The detente was the relaxing of tensions between the two countries. Maybe. Did the U.S. just think it wasn't right? Maybe. But the U.S. goes Israel and says, "Hey, you got to give that land back. You got to give back the Sinai Peninsula. You got to give back the Gaza Strip. You got to give back the West Bank. You got to give back Golan Heights. That's just not right." Israel agrees, except the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Israel says, "No, look, we'll give back." I'm going to go back to the other map. We'll give back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, and we'll give back the Golan Heights. Let's partially give back the Golan Heights. This part, Syria. And we'll give back this huge Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. We're not giving back the West Bank. We're not giving back the Gaza Strip. Yes, the Golan Heights, West Bank, and Gaza Strip are all going to be controlled by Israel. And in 1977, Egypt and Israel, after back and forths, agreement and disagreement, ceasefire and no ceasefire, they make peace. In what's called the Camp David Accords. And President Jimmy Carter, U.S. President Jimmy Carter, famously, here's a picture of it. He creates peace between Israel and Egypt, and wow, it seems like this is these two, because really Egypt was like the largest group fighting Israel. It was mostly Egypt, okay, and now the big two aren't fighting anymore. Yay, right? Unless you're Egypt. The leader of Egypt is now going to be considered an enemy to many Muslim Arabs for making peace with Israel. And in 1981, he will be killed at a military parade on live TV. Imagine a parade, a military parade. The military is passing, the president. Members of the military jump out of the parade. They run to the president's box and they kill him on live TV in 1981 because he was such an enemy, because he made this peace with Israel. Okay. In 1993, in 1998, Jordan gives up its claim to the West Bank. Say, we're going to give it to the PLO. PLO had been established in the 70s, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and Jordan says, we're going to give it to them. We're not. They haven't been able to do anything with this land. They said, let's try something different. Let's give it to the people who live there, the actual Palestinians. We live in the West Bank. We live in the Gaza Strip. They say, you guys can have it. So in 1993, 5 years later, President Clinton gets the PLO together and they get Israel together. And Israel says, we will give some control of some of this land to the Palestinians. Okay, that's better than nothing, right? And by the end of 1999, you can see that this area here, the Gaza Strip, a lot of it, the green area is controlled by Palestinians. In this area here, the West Bank, I don't want to give you an estimate, but half of the West Bank, maybe, is controlled by Palestinians. The other half is still under Israeli control, or Israeli occupation is what they call it. Now, in 2011, the United States was attacked by a terrorist by the name of Osama bin Laden from this part of the world, who claims one of the reasons he attacked the U.S. was U.S. support of Israel in this area. This is the September 11th terrorist attacks. And one of the complaints that people have, not only that Israel is still occupying the West Bank and parts of the Gaza Strip, is that Israel, in this land that they're occupying, is sometimes building these settlements in this land. This is very American, European style settlements in a land that historically is not have American, European style settlements. And the question is, are you ever going to give this land back? And if you do, what are you going to do with all these really beautiful settlements that are being built on this land? In 2005, Israel agrees to give the Gaza Strip back completely to the Arabs. Okay? So in 2005, Israel is going to give the entire Gaza Strip back to the Arabs. And this is a moment of hope. And they have an election. Remember this. I was hopeful. And the people of the Gaza Strip had a choice between the PLO, who had been working with Israel since the 70s, who had controlled this land since 88, and another political party was running by the name of Hamas. Hamas was running on the idea of we must not allow Israel to exist. We will fight Israel. And the people of the Gaza Strip chose Hamas. They chose a political party that wasn't looking to work with Israel, but was looking to destroy Israel. You should also know that since, since 2001, September 11th attacks, the people of the West Bank and the people of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians, they were launching terrorist attacks against Israelis. They would launch missiles into Israeli cities, especially Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is a city in the northern part of Israel, right here. Sometimes they would hit and kill Israeli citizens. They would also have suicide bombers go into crowded nightclubs. I specifically remember there was like a nightclub, it was a pizza nightclub, I don't know, something like that. And a guy with a suicide vest went in there, a Palestinian, he blew himself up, killed a bunch of Israelis, like young people who were out and fun stuff. So this is awful, okay? Okay. And since then, since the Gaza Strip chose Hamas as its leadership, there's still been no peace, obviously. And in the West Bank, Hamas still controls the Gaza Strip, this little teeny strip of land. Now, interesting thing about the Gaza Strip is that Egypt will not, there's a border, there's a fence here, they won't let the Gazans out. That was part of the agreement, that there would be no movement because that's how terrorists can get weapons in and out, this kind of thing. And maybe they'll, you can leave with permission. It's not an open border. And Egypt is not helping Gaza. That's part of the agreement between Egypt and Israel. That's part of why Egypt and Israel aren't fighting. They haven't been fighting since 1977. That's part of the Camp David Accords. Now, if you look at this, what you're going to find, this is the modern map of the West Bank. So Gaza Strip, controlled by Hamas, Palestinian people. Very poor country. Here's the West Bank. There's Jerusalem. Most of Jerusalem is now incorporated in Israel, actually under President Trump. He allowed, for the first time, the Israelis to move their capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Most presidents of the US say don't do that because Jerusalem is kind of like in conflict. Right? We don't know if it truly should be Israel or how's it going to turn out or whatever. And Trump said no. Trump's a large supporter of Israel. You guys can move your capital to Jerusalem. That was a big deal. So here's Jerusalem. Most of it is under Israel, is Israel, and it's their capital city. Now, what we find in the West Bank is that only the areas in green are the areas that are controlled by Palestinians. The areas in light pink are controlled by Israel, and the areas in the dark pink are controlled by Israel, but also kind of monitored by Palestine. It's kind of a power sharing agreement. Okay. So, yeah. This is a source of conflict. Spot. This is one of the areas of the world that I don't know. No one knows what's going to happen. No one knows what should happen. I don't know what should happen. Other people have their opinions. This is a hotspot of the world, and maybe I hope to explain a little better why.